Okay. Well, it is a sweet gift to get to be here again this morning and be back. I'm with Sarah now. I can't believe how quickly these 6 weeks have gone. So thank you for joining us for this circle and for just being together, kind of connecting ourselves with God's reality. At Kaleid, we love to engage our perspectives about life in light of God's reality, and this is one of the spaces we do that. So I hope that again today, the imaginative prayer time will give you energy for your participation with God's work in the world. And today we get to be with Abigail in 1 Samuel. And she let her life speak in a pretty poignant way. Parker Palmer, who's the author of the book, Let Your Life Speak, from which we got the title for this series, says, I lead by word and deed simply because I'm here doing what I do. If you're also here doing what you do, then you also exercise leadership of some sort. And if you're like me at all, it's easy for me to assume that someone else is leading. I can be surprised to look around and realize that my presence or participation has actually generated something new in others or in the world. And as we come to recognize this reality about our life, that it is speaking, it helps to pay attention to other women who are living faithfully in God's story, doing what they do and leading with clarity and courage and compassion. And really, Abigail is one of those people. We only see her for really, not a lot of time out of her life, but it makes, when we do see her, it makes me think she must have had some practice at doing what she did. And I'm curious about where that came from for her. And as usual, we don't have to spend very long with our biblical women before we start asking questions about patriarchy, especially in the ancient Near East. She's a woman, and in this context, women's power derives from men, period. And she stands between two strong men, her husband, Nabal, who is, according to the scripture, brutish and mean. He's a very rich fool. And then she, on the other side, has the not yet king, David, who has just violently sworn that everyone in Nabal's misbegotten brood will be dead by morning. And this is so because Nabal denied David's request for food for his men. At the time, David's men were still hiding from Saul in the wilderness, and while they were there, they had also been protecting Nabal's shepherds because they were also in the wilderness. And at shearing time, which is a time of celebration and food and feast, David thought that Nabal owed him hospitality in the form of food and provisions for his men. And Nabal refused that and also insulted David. And it provokes from David this overwhelmingly violent impulse in response. And this is where we find Abigail. She finds out about the pending plans for the slaughter from a servant who asks her, the scripture says, to do something quickly because big trouble is ahead for our master Nabal and all of us. And nobody can talk to him. He's impossible, a real brute. So Abigail obviously knows this about her husband, and it falls to her to save the day. And the other part of the story that it's helpful to think about in terms of her and her voice is where we are in David's story. David has been anointed king, but he's not yet king. And he's been running from Saul and consolidating support. Samuel's also just died at the beginning of this chapter, and David no longer has a spiritual leader, and he won't again until Nathan comes on the scene. And this story of Abigail and Nabal and David in 1 Samuel 25 is sandwiched in between two other chapters, 24 and 26, each of which contains a story of David sparing Saul's life. So commentators say that these three chapters together serve as a central piece in the defense of David against the charge of using violence to gain the throne. So the point of these three chapters is to show that he comes to his power peacefully, that he does not ascend the throne through a violent overthrow of Saul or through violence against his own people. And these three chapters and Abigail's place in them really also show us that it's God's plan. And this nonviolent ascent to the throne is God's grace for his chosen king. Because there's some nonviolence in 24 and 26 that does belong to David and his kind of sense of God and Saul. But it also belongs in chapter 25 to God's providence and to Abigail's courageous and discerning work of peacemaking in this chapter. So Abigail is called beautiful and intelligent, one of a few women called both of these things in scripture, and she shows up to her own life and works with God. Somehow she discerns God's activity and embodies God's activity on behalf of David. If David was quick to act for violence here, Abigail matches his decisiveness in the effort to avoid it. And her practical action to meet David on the way with the food that he's asking for is matched by her cunning, self-effacing speech, which goes back to the whole patriarchy thing. She refers to David as master more times than we will care to hear. It's really kind of amazing how many times she says that word. But her words are also filled with prophetic power. She boldly tells David about the kind of king that God is making him into. In her speech to him, she is looking at the long view. She sees issues at stake beyond what is in the current situation and enables David to see those too, and to lay down his arms. She counters vengeance with hospitality. And when she speaks to the violence that is at work in David's heart, she reminds him about God's work of life that is also at work within his heart. So her words are courageous and peacemaking words. She had a horrible husband. As I said before, she must have been practiced at taking life-giving action in the face of fear. She must have had experience at taking the long view and letting it embolden her to stand up against violence. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." One of the commentators I read says that to do good rather than evil is to align our actions with what God is doing. To be a peacemaker is to seek the unity of human moral agency with divine agency. And Abigail is a model for this kind of peacemaking. So today's story is an invitation to consider the voice of women who are courageously peacemaking in a violent world. And we enter God's salvation story by letting the Spirit speak to us through Abigail and invite us toward our own expression of acting justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly with God. So as we begin again today, we begin with Micah 6, as we have been, which says, "Dear people, how have I done you wrong? Have I burdened you, worn you out? Answer, I delivered you from a bad life in Egypt. I paid a good price to get you out of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you and Aaron and Miriam to boot. Remember what Balak, king of Moab, tried to pull, and how Balaam, son of Beor, turned the tables on him? Remember all the stories about Shittim and Gilgal? Keep all God's salvation stories fresh and present. How can I stand up before God and show proper respect to the high God? Should I bring an armload of offerings, topped off with yearling calves? Would God be impressed with thousands of rams, with buckets and barrels of olive oil? Would he be moved if I sacrificed my firstborn child, my precious baby, to cancel my sin? But he's already made it plain how to live, what to do, what God is looking for in men and women. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously." So as we enter in this morning, I invite you to relax into our time and to let God lead you, rather than trying to force an insight. Just be open and trust the Spirit who sees you and knows you and made your imagination and loves it to meet you in this sacred opportunity for encounter. I will read the passage again 3 times, And I'm going to switch between versions this time. I'll offer you a prompt before each reading and some silence after. At the end, we'll leave a final space of silence. So get comfortable where you are and feel free to turn off your screen or to leave it on. And just come into your body for a minute. Take a few breaths that are deeper than the ones you have been breathing. Wherever you are, maybe you can find a relaxed but attentive posture with your feet on the floor, your hands perhaps uncrossed, your arms open, your hands open, your face and your jaw and your throat relaxed. Notice something that you hear or feel in the room around you. You are here now with this text and with the Holy Spirit. God, we welcome you here. Stir our imagination and our hearts by the power of your Spirit and draw us to Jesus. In this first reading, we're just becoming familiar with the story and imagining ourselves at the scene, noticing the details with our senses, what we're seeing, smelling, hearing, feeling, and tasting, what it feels like in our heart and our body to be there. We're noticing the human reality that Abigail is inhabiting. We're noticing what's complicating or constraining about her situation. In this reading, let your imagination take you into an awareness of the messy humanness, the context of the scene. Abigail flew into action. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep dressed out and ready for cooking, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, and 200 fig cakes. And she had it all loaded on some donkeys. Then she said to her young servants, "Go ahead and pave the way for me. I'm right behind you." But she said nothing to her husband, Nabal. As she was riding her donkey, descending into a ravine, David and his men were descending from the other end, so they met there on the road. David had just said, "That sure was a waste guarding everything this man had out in the wild, so that nothing he had was lost. And now he rewards me with insults, a real slap in the face. May God do his worst to me if Nabal and every cur in his misbegotten brood aren't dead meat by morning." As soon as Abigail saw David, she got off her donkey and fell on her knees at his feet, her face to the ground in homage, saying, "My master, let me take the blame. Let me speak to you. Listen to what I have to say. Don't dwell on what that brute Nabal did. He acts out of the meaning of his name. Nabal, fool. Foolishness oozes from him. I wasn't there when the young men my master sent arrived. I didn't see them. And now, my master, as God lives and as you live, God has kept you from this avenging murder. And may your enemies, all who seek my master's harm, end up like Nabal. Now take this gift that I, your servant girl, have brought to my master, and give it to the young men who follow in the steps of my master. Forgive my presumption, but God is at work in my master, developing a solid rule and dependable. My master fights God's battles. As long as you live, no evil will stick to you. If anyone stands in your way, if anyone tries to get you out of the way, know this: your God-honored life is tightly bound in the bundle of God-protected life. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled aside as a stone is thrown from a sling. When God completes all the goodness he has promised my master and sets you up as prince over Israel, my master will not have this dead weight in his heart, the guilt of an avenging murder. And when God has worked things for good for my master, remember me." And David said, Blessed be God, the God of Israel. He sent you to meet me, and blessed be your good sense. Bless you for keeping me from murder and taking charge of looking out for me. A close call. As God lives, the God of Israel who kept me from hurting you, if you had not come as quickly as you did, stopping me in my tracks, by morning there would have been nothing left in Nabal but dead meat. Then David accepted the gift she had brought him and said, "Return home in peace. I've heard what you've said, and I'll do what you've asked." And now we pause and reflect. In this next reading, imagine yourself as Abigail. Put yourself into her experience in the story. What are you aware of? What is your own sense of your place and your time? What has your life experience shown you about yourself or others or God's work in the world? And how is today's work challenging you? What is it bringing up for you, and what is at the heart of your courage? In this reading, let your imagination lead you toward an awareness of Deborah herself, not Deborah, Abigail, noticing her desires and her sense of God. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, "Go on ahead of me. I'm coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely it was in vain that I protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good. God do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from the donkey and fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Upon me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. My lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be like Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If anyone should rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living, under the care of the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for having saved himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to me today. Blessed be your good sense, and blessed be you, who kept me today from blood guilt and from avenging myself by my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. He said to her, Go up to your house in peace. See, I have heeded your voice, and I have granted your petition. And now we pause and reflect. In the third reading, consider, how does Abigail let her life speak? How does she embody doing justice, loving mercy, or walking humbly with God? What does her voice sound like? What does it call forth or create? How does it impact the people around her or her world? During this reading, let your imagination lead you toward an awareness of God's work in the world, birthed through the life and the voice of a woman. Abigail flew into action. She took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep dressed out and ready for cooking, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, and 200 fig cakes. And she had it all loaded on some donkeys. Then she said to her young servants, "Go ahead and pave the way for me. I'm right behind you." But she said nothing to her husband, Nabal. As she was riding her donkey, descending into a ravine, David and his men were just descending from the other end, so they met there on the road. David had just said, "That sure was a waste, guarding everything this man had out in the wild, so that nothing he had was lost. And now he rewards me with insults, a real slap in the face. May God do his worst to me if Nabal and every cur in his misbegotten brood aren't dead meat by morning." As soon as Abigail saw David, she got off her donkey and fell on her knees at his feet, her face to the ground in homage, saying, "My master, let me take the blame. Let me speak to you. Listen to what I have to say. Don't dwell on what that brute Nabal did. He acts out of the meaning of his name, Nabal, fool. Foolishness oozes from him. I wasn't there when the young men my master sent arrived. I didn't see them. And now, my master, as God lives and as you live, God has kept you from this avenging murder. And may your enemies, all who seek my master's harm, end up like Nabal. Now take this gift that I, your servant girl, have brought to my master, and give it to the young men who follow in the steps of my master. Forgive my presumption, but God is at work in my master, developing a solid rule and dependable one. My master fights God's battles. As long as you live, no evil will stick to you. If anyone stands in your way, if anyone tries to get you out of the way, know this: your God-honored life is tightly bound in the bundle of God-protected life. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled aside as a stone is thrown from a sling. When God completes all the goodness he has promised my master and sets you up as a prince over Israel, my master will not have this dead weight in his heart, the guilt of an avenging murder. And when God has worked things for the good for my master, remember me." And David said, "Blessed be God, the God of Israel. He sent you to meet me, and blessed be your good sense. Bless you for keeping me from murder and for taking charge of looking out for me. A close call. As God lives, the God of Israel, who kept me from hurting you, if you had not come as quickly as you did, stopping me in my tracks, by morning there would have been nothing left of Nabal but dead meat." Then David accepted the gift she brought him and said, "Return home in peace. I've heard what you've said, and I'll do what you've asked." Now we pause and reflect. We're going to be still for another minute and just use this time to talk to God. Sit with any invitation that has come to you today through this exercise. Offer a prayer of receptivity to the Spirit, and then after a time, a prayer of response. And when our time is up, I will call us back and offer a space for sharing. Now, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to return and offer to the group what stood out to you as a gift, but there is never an obligation to do that. Well, thank you all very much for being here and for practicing discerning and listening together, and for being willing to be a part of a community that kind of slows down and becomes open in this way to the Spirit. So we will be back again in the fall. Well, I mean, probably a little before the fall with our next contemplative prayer time. But it's just always a gift, and I'm always sad to be done. And I appreciate each one of you, and thank you for being here. And I will close our time with a poem that I enjoyed recently. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train comes ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet, if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity. In the flush of love's light, we dare to be brave. And suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. So today and the rest of the summer, go in peace.